Gators Breakdown episode 41 is live and ready to go as we are going to evaluate the Florida Gator recruiting class heading in to National Signing Day 2017, only a few days away now. So with National Signing Day approaching, I thought it would be a good idea to dive deeper into Jim McElwain's recruiting since he started here at Florida. And there are many ways to look at this recruiting classes of the past to determine success. The easiest way, of course, is to looking at all the recruiting services out there, recruiting rankings, but sometimes that is not the whole story. So to help me take a deeper look into Jim McElwain's recruiting as Gators head coach, Bill Sykes joins me to give some good and some bad analysis going into Jim McElwain's third class. Many know Bill from the 24/7 Gators message board, Alligator Alley, where he goes by the moniker Gator Bill 116, where he shares his own research, where he's conducted himself pertaining to the Florida program. So, Bill, I can't thank you enough for joining me here on Gators Breakdown today.
Hey, man, thank you for having me. It's an absolute privilege, and I can't wait.
Yeah, I think we got some good stuff here. We were kind of, I think I've noticed your post on 24/7 for a while now, and we were kind of introduced last week with some popular posts going back and forth from Gators recruiting, and some mutual friends there kind of suggested we get together for this podcast, and I think we're gonna have something good for the folks out there today.
I'm going to try, man. I like to think of myself as a 5-star nerd when it comes to recruiting, so hopefully I add a little something.
5-star nerd, I like it. That's a T-shirt idea.
Yeah, maybe the wrong kind of T-shirt though.
Okay, I'm David Waters, your host. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, and I talked to Bill, and if we get this a regular occurrence, we'll throw his out there too as well. Maybe something new there. But you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. You can subscribe all those locations. Just search those sites and get the links by following us on Twitter at Gators Breakdown and on Facebook. Just search Gators Breakdown there. Bill, before we dive really deep into everything, this is a Sunday podcast now. So before we head into diving in, we had some big commitments yesterday with Nick Smith and Brad Stewart, kind of to stop the bleeding from last week, I guess you could say.
Yes, we did. And I think you're probably a little higher on Nick Smith than I am. And I don't dislike the guy. I don't say he's not a take, but Brad Stewart, to me, last week or so, I've really been diving into this guy and watching some film and reading up on some things. And I'm actually kind of drinking the Kool-Aid on this guy. And I don't want to get crazy. Like some people have made some tease table comparisons, but that guy has some serious body control. He plays the game with a real swagger. And I don't mean like a trash talk. I mean, there's a real confidence to his game when you can see his change of pace in the midst of a play, the way he uses his body. I think there's some serious potential with that guy, maybe even on the outside at corner like we've been told.
Yeah, I think he gets first crack at that corner, and it seems like all these DBs that are coming in may get first crack at corner because that's where the biggest need is.
I think I get first crack at corner.
Oh, yeah. And like you said, Nick Smith, I am high on. I think, of course, the obvious comparison since he is a underrated 3-star linebacker is Jared Davis with about the same size, 6'2", 6'3", 210 coming into college. I think that's the obvious comparison. I think we'd all love for Nick Smith to become next Jared Davis. And I was really high on Jared Davis. He was from high school right up the road here in Jacksonville. He went up to Camden County High School, so I got to follow him a good bit his last couple of years at Camden County. And yeah, I mean, I see a lot of Jared Davis and Nick Smith with the way he's around the ball and the way he attacks the ball with kind of a reckless abandon. But that is a lawfully expectation. Okay, here's a 3-star that's going to end up playing like a 5-star.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. And really, it's a matter of I haven't watched enough tape to make a qualified opinion. I saw a lot of his junior film where he had his hand on the ground. And I don't think he's quite got the frame to bulk up enough to play like that in college. And he kind of ran around blocks a little bit when he was playing that way. But the guy obviously has some serious agility, and he's not afraid to lay the hat either. So I think that, he might be a good take.
All right, so let's move on to kind of what I brought Bill on here for anyway, and it's kind of to talk about the trend of Florida recruiting under Jim McElwain. This will be Jim McElwain's third class for his 2017 class, and the concern for this class really started to ramp up after last week's debacle and losing the commitment from Elijah Blades and big-time target Kaleon Hebert. Bill, some people, I mean, saw this kind of coming with the type of finish. Of course, we had the commits yesterday, but maybe with this type of finish, maybe didn't people seeing it being this bad going in.
Yeah.
Not, I think, well, first of all, before yesterday, Florida was ranked 31st in 24/7 rankings, and of course, have shot up since then. But in generalities, I guess if you want to go back to when Jim McElwain was hired, we know he had just short time to get that class together to now, where he's kind of scrambling before signing day in some ways. What are your thoughts on the troubles Jim McElwain's faced on the recruiting trail?
Well, troubles as far as his results, or troubles as far as what he's trying to overcome?
What he's trying to overcome.
Well, let's be honest. We've got problems here that go back the better part of a decade. And I think really the primary one, which I'll discuss later on, when we talk about solutions, is the quarterback position. When you look at Urban Meyer's last few years, there was a 2-year gap when he didn't sign a quarterback. He answered that with a few 3-stars. Since 2010, the quarterback recruiting has not been the same in numbers and in quality. And I think that shows. You look at before that, when you had Chris Leak coming in and you had Tim Tebow coming in, like we had Cam Newton. I mean, Josh Portis could have been a great quarterback. We had good quarterback play, and that drives your offense. Then you follow that up, and Will Muschamp decides to stop recruiting offensive linemen here and there. You got a problem, And so, yeah, he took over some serious dysfunction and personnel problems, particularly on the offensive side of the ball, really only on the offensive side of the ball, and maybe kicker. Florida hasn't really been at the highest levels like it was since mid Urban Meyer era. The perception of these kids now is not the same as it was. So yeah, he's overcoming a lot. It's not the same brand and quite the same in the minds of these recruits, and it's a little bit a harder sell. Me personally, I'm not saying that's an excuse, and I'll kind of get to why not later, but he definitely has had some serious challenges. Oh, and one more. How can we forget Will Grier? I mean, you talk about Charlie Browning and a coach when you take a possible franchise quarterback away right at the moment he thinks he's, bringing his team to the center stage. That's a problem. Right.
I mean, I think we all remember how Florida fans felt after that Ole Miss game last year. I mean, it was everything was going right. The swamp was electric as it always been. Recruits were in a way, and from what I heard, were kind of knocking down the door of trying to get noticed by Florida at that time, because Florida had just shot up the rankings.
Sure.
With a big win versus Ole Miss, and you would have really liked to see somehow Florida capitalize on that. And ever since then, it just kind of seems the program has been in a funk. Ever since the week later, he did play. Will Grier did play against Missouri, but the kind of rumblings were kind of out right before that game that something might be coming along. And you're right, that set the program back, set Jim McElwain back, because you would really like to think Grier would have built on getting better and not put we've seen the ugly Treon Harris, Luke Del Rio, Austin Appleby offense, and you know what? That's another part of it, I think, is what can he sell on the offensive side of the ball? That while Florida fans, I think a lot of us say, "Oh, we're just a quarterback away."
Yeah.
Is it more than that? I mean, if you look at receiver position and the offensive line position since Jim McElwain has come in, those two positions have been completely transformed. You have receivers that you actually can rely on now, and numbers, specifically numbers at offensive line, definitely seem to be better.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think he's taken some good hauls at running back, and he's taken a couple of quarterbacks. One of those is 4-star. The offensive line numbers are up. I don't know, though, man. I mean, how many good games have we had on offense? And I know Will Grier left, but he's the only coach since Steve Spurrier to not take a quarterback in his first recruiting class. I don't think that's excusable. I know you had Treon. I know you had Will Grier there. How do you not come in and take a guy? And so while I think that a lot of these issues were dug for him, I think that maybe some steps were missed that really could have averted some of the problems we're now, or at least giving him a puncher's chance.
Right, because he was in for DeAndre Francois, I believe, tried to get him at the last minute before going to FSU, and of course we know what happened there. So you're right. It's kind of inexcusable not to get a quarterback, and especially one where you're supposed to be this quarterback guru. You would think you'd kind of want your own guy to mold and go along in that process. But maybe he had that much confidence in Will Grier, deservedly so.
Or perhaps hubris.
Or maybe he planned on Clarabelle. coming in, and
that could have been the plan,
and getting snaps there. So of course, there's two sides to the recruiting debate. Of course, some say stars don't matter, and they cite programs like Washington and an extent Clemson in a way, and others say, and I tend to agree, that you have to recruit well to win how Florida fans want to win, and that's winning titles. And Urban Meyer was the perfect example of that. Top of the recruiting rankings, playing for championships. Teams that do that, are at the top of the recruiting service. How does this get fixed? I mean, it's not necessarily, he can survive off of getting these underrated 3-stars, and I don't think, we know Florida doesn't win that way. Florida wins when they're getting the stars in today's age. This isn't Spurrier where he's surprising everybody with this new type of offense and throwing it all over the yard, and the SEC has to catch up. Urban Meyer, to a certain extent as well, did that. But I guess I'll ask you, can he survive by recruiting the way he's recruiting?
Let me put it to you this way. Let me drop a fact on you here.
Yeah.
Now, this number, the total number of signees I've got, I did it on a spreadsheet, and I've been kind of adjusting it on the fly as we take commits. But since 2002, and this is as far as I can find at least somewhat accurate record for through the 247 composite, Florida signed about 363 players, or will, including the class that's about to sign. Of those 363 signees, your first team AP all SEC players, there was 22 of them. And I don't count kickers in that. Okay, but 22 guys out of those 363 signees went on to be AP postseason all SEC. That's your cream of the crop, right? Mm-hmm. 11 of those were 5-stars. 9 of them were 4-stars, and only 2 were 3-stars. Even though they've only signed 35 5-stars in that time, a third of them went on to be half of your AP All-SEC players. 4-stars, you signed 158, and 9 of them went on. But out of the 170 3-star and 2-star signees you've had since 2002, only 2 of them have been All-SEC. So what does that tell you? I mean, it's a huge disproportion. And when you say, can you win this way? Well, I'm going to tell you that what we talk about with stars is we're talking about a ranking system. It's a tiered ranking system. Who's getting the most desired players, the ones that everybody says are the best? Well, if you say, can you win, can the Gators win with those lower desired players? Nobody's doing it. That's my answer. Nobody's doing it. Not one SEC team has won the SEC. One team has won the SEC since 2006 without a top 5 class in their 4-year, national top 5 class in their 4-year cycle of building a roster. The only team that hasn't was Auburn in 2010, that one had Cam Newton, a franchise-type quarterback, and they signed 140 players in 4 years by oversigning. So while they were taking some 3-stars, they were getting more draws from the pot of 3-stars to beat the trend. And they still had a top 10 class in that. And then when you look at the other conferences, no team has made it to the playoffs yet without ranking a top 3 class in their conference. So they may not have had a top 5 national, but relative to their competition, every single one of them in their 4-year cycle of roster building, actually I think it went back 5 years, has had at least one top 3 class in their conference. McElwain's not getting close to that. So Clemson has recruited at a far higher level. Washington, relative to their competition, has recruited better, while Florida is languishing literally just below the midpoint of their conference on average for 3 years.
And I know a lot of people point to Washington, Michigan State, to say, oh, well, those teams don't recruit well. They're getting to the playoffs. But you know what? We see what happens when they get to the playoffs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, yeah, they are recruiting on a level that is good in their conference and is good enough to get there. Like Washington had one class scout ranked them as number 2 in the pack, whatever they are, in 2013. All the other services had them 3rd place. But then when they get there, they get West Coasted out of the playoffs. Right.
So, Bill, I guess there's, you looked at it a different way. I mean, how does it get fixed? Is it as simple as, we have to look at how Florida fixes this. Is it coaches? Is it somehow to build better relationships? We of course know the coaching openings that Florida has coming in, and from what we've heard, it's probably already cost them one recruit.
Yeah.
But, not necessarily because lack of coaches, but lack of coaches who can recruit right now. And a lot of people want to say, that Florida only has maybe one, two good recruiters on staff. I guess throw Chris Rumpf in there, and I guess how does it get fixed? Is it the coaches? Is it building better relationships? I mean, we've seen articles where recruits and recruits' fathers say Florida doesn't jump on a guy early enough, and they're playing catch up. So, is there an easy fix? Is it really just as simple as getting better recruiters, or can Florida themselves on the field help with the reputation of what Florida is right now?
Well, first, let me just say this. To identify what specifically we're trying to get fixed, we're talking about things like during the McElwain era, his average number of Florida top 25 athletes, as in the top athletes in the state of Florida, has gone down by 60%, like 2/3. The number of the Florida top 40 has dropped in half. The national top 100 has dropped by 60%. He's lost tremendous ground against the principal rivals, especially Florida State and Georgia. Tennessee's off a little bit this year. This may be the second year in a row, which is historically unprecedented since the internet, that Florida may go back-to-back years without landing a consensus 5-star prospect. These are the things that have to get fixed. To me, it starts with landing elite talent, especially in your state, and doing better against your rivals. And to that end, there's a couple of things. Number one, you got to fix that quarterback position. And I think it remains the lightning rod, even of a recruiting class. I don't think it's coincidence that Georgia landed Jacob Eason, and now they're recruiting even better. Now, that's me off the cuff, but I think that they got to do that. I think they got to get better quality arms in camp. To illustrate that, like as I said earlier, McElwain was the only one of the last 4 coaches to not bring in a quarterback during his transition year. Since from 2002 to 2007, because remember, this started in the Urban Meyer era, you were averaging over 1 blue chip quarterback per year. Since 2007, the ratio is down to 0.5 per year. McElwain has the lowest number of quarterbacks signed total. He's only signed 3, where the last 3 guys signed 5, 4, and 4 respectively. His star averages are down significantly. It used to be over 4. Now he's down to a 3.33. So he's got to go out and get quarterbacks. If it's me, I'm going to James Blackman down at Belle Glade, and I'm going to say, hey, listen, man, I know we were late. We've had problems. I want to bank my future on you. I'm not settling, and this is nothing against the kid from St. Thomas Aquinas, Jake Allen. You got to get another guy in there that looks like he has a live arm and can change your program. We are way beyond let's tweak recruiting, let's tweak this. It's time to put juice in this program. Number 2, I don't want to throw too much shade in Division I coaches, okay, but we know there's some problems there and there's some gaps in recruiting. If it's me, like there's rumors that maybe Greg Nord's going to move on this year. I show that his area on the map is the Big Bend of Florida for his recruiting territory. You're going to take Florida back. Right now, they are being absolutely bullied in state, and not just by Florida State, not just by Alabama, not just by Ohio State. That's your tier 1. Yep. Then LSU, Clemson, and even Texas A&M's coming and poaching. I take his territory, and I say, we're going to divide this up between the other assistants. If he moves on, I go out and hire the baddest hired gun recruiter I can find, whether that be Jawan Sider, somebody else, and I say, hey, you know what you are? You're not a territorial recruiter. You were to recruit the whole state, but I'm making a list. You're going to be my savage hunter. I'm going to identify 10, 12, 15 guys. You go get me 3 to 4 of these guys. Because if you think about it, whether it's Cyrus Fagan or Denarius Robinson last year, the difference, 3 to 4 guys in this class that are elites from the state of Florida changes the entire perception of your efforts. And I take this guy and I say, this is our guy. We're recruiting the absolute best. You don't get recruited by this guy unless you're a VIP. And we're going to change Florida football. And you go to toe-to-toe with Florida State and Alabama in your state, and you've got to carve out a niche. If you don't, he's done. That's just all there is to it.
Right. You would hope, he can just chip away at it, get a couple of the, LeBron Rays out there and Levi Jones that are up in this class that within the next couple of days are going to be making decisions. And, you got to chip away. You got to start getting guys. And you say, and you mentioned, and I even said it earlier, I hate to make it sound so easy, but
it's not.
The quarterback problem is issue number 1, and you get that fixed, and I really do think it helps a lot. It helps to, you start playing well, showing recruits that, there's some excitement. And I went back and mentioned, how Florida looked in that Ole Miss game, the year before last, and, how everything was looking and trending up, and it was exciting Florida football was exciting again. We got rid of the Will Muschamp ugliness of offense, and it was finally started looking good.
Sure.
And then, nothing. And it has looked like that for a year and a half now. So, what happens when you do get a quarterback and it's showing? You can't blame wide receivers for not wanting to come and play with what quarterback play they've seen the last, couple seasons. Yes. And like you said, you can sell them on, let's go change this, but it really starts with that quarterback position. You can sell, receivers, and you can sell offensive linemen and running backs much easier when you find that position to be taken care of. So, Bill, I mean, is it really all Jim McElwain's fault? Is there something here that he can, do we lay it all in his lap? I was on Bill King last week in his show in Nashville, and I said, when recruiting got this bad, to me, it does fall on the head man. But are there some excuses out there for Jim McElwain, and, where it's not necessarily all his fault?
Oh, yeah. Look, man, I don't like to place too much blame, and I probably do come across that way a little bit on the boards. And I'm known to be a guy that's been pessimistic of this McElwain era, and I was pessimistic of the Muschamp era, but I was right. Maybe it's me, maybe it's the truth. I don't know, but no, it's not all his fault. He couldn't help what Muschamp did with the offensive line. He couldn't help what Urban Meyer did with his Papa John's pizza and quitting, and then all that stuff. But he could have brought in a quarterback that first year. He could have found one. He could have filled these staff positions before signing day and not lost Aberry. And I'm not saying that guy's the be-all, end-all, and let's be honest, we're hearing a lot of things coming through the grapevine about, oh, they didn't call this recruit back. Oh, they didn't get on this guy early. Oh, they didn't show this guy love. Oh, this guy showed up on campus and they didn't know who he was. It's over and over and over and over. And it's getting to the point where you got to think, maybe some of this is his fault. And hey, what if it's not his fault, but maybe he's not the guy to fix it? Bottom line, he's got to show us. He's got to prove it. And hey, maybe he turns out to be the guy that says stars don't matter. I can just offer the guys that Florida State doesn't want and that Alabama doesn't want and not go toe-to-toe, and I'll just take the low-hanging fruit, and I'm such a good tactician, I'm going to beat you. Maybe he's that guy.
I have a feeling.
Who's done that?
Right. I have a feeling that is part of his thinking, his line of thinking. I really do think Jim McElwain thinks some way that he can do that he is that good of a coach. But I think we've seen, when you play with fire, you get burned. And we've seen that with FSU. We've seen that with Bama the last 2 years, where they are recruiting like Florida is supposed to recruit. And it shows. And it shows in every bit of late November, early December. Yeah, Florida's getting to the SEC title game. And, in comparison to the rest of the SEC East, there's not enough talent there still right now where Florida can't win the East again and represent the East for the third year in a row. But when you bring up Georgia and you bring up Tennessee, Georgia's getting better. Georgia's getting the players. Now, whether Kirby Smart can coach them, I guess that remains to be seen, and we'll see what happens there. But you know what? They're figuring out one piece of the puzzle, and that one piece of the puzzle is what we're talking about right here. Yeah.
And hey, let's do this. And I hope your listeners will bear with me. I know that I sound like I'm just throwing shade on everything McElwain does, but I think you brought me on here to kind of present the other side. And, you take this for what you will, and I hope I'm wrong, and I hope the guy wins. And, hey, if he can win with low-rated recruits, it's going to be easy, and he's going to win 20 championships. Because when he does start winning, he's going to start getting the great recruits anyway. But anyway, look, the guy has won 2 Eastern Division championships. He's got essentially 2 back-to-back 10-win seasons if the Presbyterian game hadn't been canceled. His defenses, believe it or not, are in a statistical tie for total defense with the best since Spurrier. Now, because he tied for number 5 in total defense back-to-back years, which is as good as Muschamp ever did. However, he also, being the quarterback whisperer, has fielded the worst total offense team. And I dare say you might not find one in the 70s or 80s that bad. It was 116th this year. It's getting worse after being 112th the year before. The guy has the worst average margin of both victory and defeat for any coach since Spurrier. He's over a touchdown worse on his average margin of defeat, losing games by right at 3 touchdowns a game. When I saw that, I was shocked at that. The guy's 1% better through 2 seasons, 1% better than Muschamp was at this point. He has 1 more win. He has the same bowl record, the same record versus rivals, and he has the worst record with fewest victories versus ranked team of any of the 4 previous post-Spurrier coaches. And also, while he did win the East, people have been debating whether the SEC East is down. The SEC has had the worst winning percentage under his tenure of any previous coach back to Spurrier. Fewer teams ranked in the final poll and fewer 10-win teams. So it's not like the guy is really doing much outside of Ole Miss. Now, I am thankful he beat Georgia.
Yep.
We're going to tip our 40s to that. You know what I'm saying? Because you don't ever take that for granted.
And I guess, when McElwain, in his defense, is he wins for most of the part. And I guess the Arkansas game this year was the one I could point to. For the most part, he wins the games he's supposed to win.
Yes, he does. He's a good coach.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. And if you talk to enough national people out there, I've had Peter Burns on Gators Breakdown, SEC Network, Peter Burns, and during the LSU week, and the hot topic there. And Peter followed LSU for a while, so I brought him on the show. And Peter is a big fan of McElwain's, and we've talked about the quarterback situation. He agrees with us. You find that quarterback, but a lot of national perception of Jim McElwain is he's a great game day coach, and
I believe that.
I do too. And and I guess we've seen also the first drive of games between him and Nussmeier. They can draw up some plays. Now they got to be able to keep that going throughout the game and make some adjustments and all that. And we know I've ad nauseum talked about Doug Nussmeier on this podcast, how I defend him a little bit. I think year 3, this coming up year, is huge for the entire program. It sets the trend, I think, for McElwain going forward. You got that big Michigan game, and Michigan loses a lot of players.
I think they beat Michigan.
Yeah. I keep leaning that way. I do. During the season, I guess seeing the ugliness over and over and over again, I kind of was like, oh, there's no way Florida's beating Michigan. But, with as much as they lose and Florida's going to have a surprise at quarterback, Luke Del Rio, I'm sorry, there's no way he's starting that game. It's going to be Kyle Trask. It's going to be Felipe Franks. Florida has, a little bit of elements of surprise there. We're not going to see much from the spring from those guys moving forward, going there. So, put it this way, and what we do see in spring, it doesn't matter. Remember Luke Del Rio, 10 for 11 for 176 yards, 2 touchdowns, or whatever it was in last year's spring game. It means nothing. I don't care how good they look, how bad they look. That game will mean nothing. So, but the spring will be important. They're going to fight it out.
Yeah, you mentioned that about McElwain being a good game day coach or great game day coach. I see a lot to love here. I mean, the guy has a system where you're like, hey, this is a normal offense. And I haven't forgotten much yet, believe me. I'm not trying to say that McElwain is not going to be the guy. I'm saying there's a few glaring deficiencies.
Yes.
And we talked about this, I think it was yesterday. I love about everything he's doing except for when it comes to recruiting and staff management. Yeah. Hiring assistants, and we had talked about this. It's the 2 things that made Urban Meyer so great. And so maybe I'm spoiled by that. Maybe there is another way, but I think if he has a downfall at Florida, those are going to be the 2 things. Bringing players in and bringing coaches in who can go get those players and then be high-level coaches. It's not like he has a coaching tree that's blossoming before our eyes.
There you
go.
At
least we haven't seen it yet.
We haven't seen it yet. You're right. I mean, the names, Meyer, Mullen, Charlie Strong, Adazio. Yeah, I mean that speaks for itself. And now, granted, they may not go off and do the greatest things in the world, but at least they were getting noticed by what they were doing at Florida. And we talked about this yesterday. Nussmeier had the whisper of flirtation with Southern Miss last year, and Jeff Collins with a previous job, and he ends up getting the Temple job, and he was being whispered for some jobs last year as well. But those are the only 2 names you really hear about. Maybe, and you and I said the only person on staff now who may fit that mold is Randy Shannon if he ever gets another crack at being a head coach. And he has a lot to prove. He's got this. I mean, it speaks to the recruiting, what we're talking about. These young guys that he has on defense coming up in this next year, we've seen flashes. And but to me, it's a much easier to come in and take over for the stars that are already there than when you become the guy. And now these David Reese and Zuniga and Moon and Chauncey Gardner, all these guys, it's their time now. There's no, backfall. If it doesn't work, we throw the starter back in, or you're just taking over for an injured guy. These guys, it is their time. And we can point to that. And when we sit here and talked about both sides of recruiting, where people say, oh, he's getting 3-stars that are playing like 4 stars and maybe like 5 stars, Antonio Callaway, Jordan Scarlett, but can he sustain that? And I think that's just the magic question here. And we've talked about it.
Yeah, I think I'll tell you what I'm looking for. I do expect the defense to have a pretty good starting 11 overall. Yep. I don't think it's going to be great, but I think it'll be satisfactory. And we all know what needs to happen on the other side of the ball is going to drive the program next year and the rest of his regime. But as far as defense, what I'm looking for is, do you have the depth? I mean, look at what we rolled into the LSU game with this year. If that happens next year, I mean, you look at the DB situation where you're already planning from right now to probably have 1 to 2 freshmen at least in the rotation, if not starting. What happens if you lose a Chauncey Gardner or a Duke Dawson?
Right, and not only that, yeah, and not only that, Gardner maybe be playing the other corner spot. This would be his first year playing it. He played safety last year,
right?
And with his talent, they're probably going to throw him out at corner and see how he does, because I don't think Putu or Williamson really they didn't show flashes last year of being able to step in and take the reins. So you're right. There might be an open spot at nickel for one of these, Marco Wilson to come in and take that spot over. So you're right. And, for Florida this past year, and I want to kick myself because, no, it's not my fault. But after the Georgia game, I said, man, it's crazy how healthy this team is. And
thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
I
guess I'll take the blame there. And then the Arkansas game the very next week, it completely just falls apart. But we know we got to see these young guys.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to point to. Yes, they're there, but now it's their time.
And I'm telling you right now, I'm going to start a fan petition. I want Kyrie Clark and Taven Bryan in bubbles from like 4 o'clock today. Period. No excuses.
No
executive order.
No spring practice.
I don't want them outside. I want them IV fluids.
No scooters.
Nobody even look at them. Just don't even look at them.
No scooters.
That's right. No cars. We're gonna bring your homework to you. Just keep working out.
Oh, man. I think we did good here. But before we wrap this up, anything else? I mean, I know you said you had some good numbers and some good trends. Anything we didn't hit on that I think you think would catch, some of our listeners' ears there? Because before that, too, also give a shout out to 24/7. That's kind of where we met up on the Alligator Alley there. And thanks for letting us meet up.
It's kind of like the Match.com for recruiting nerds. Yeah, no, 24/7 is awesome. Thomas Goldcamp, Luke Stampini, they put up with me, and I think that's enough. But they do a great job in covering everything. But, yeah, man, basically, if people are going to take anything away from this, I want people to understand that Florida's a little bit on the precipice as far as their program right now. Recruiting is very down. I think perception is very down. They got to clean things up, but hope is not lost. If Frank or Trask comes out and they do have an NFL quarterback on their roster and they can shoestring and bubblegum it through that defense next year, recruiting might take a turn. And so that's what we really need to hope for. And it could happen. Gosh, we didn't even hit on anything with the signing day this year.
No, I mean, we'll do that, of course. I think, going into signing day, I think we could look at what happens. But, I mean, I can get your thoughts on that, rolling in. Signing day is only a few days away, and I know you and I have talked about, I'll get you on after signing day, too, to kind of throw this class into the mix of what you have seen for trend and number-wise. But how do you see this class finishing? Are you excited with the last few days going in of what potentially could happen?
I'm not, man. I'm so bummed out, and I'm a negative Nelly about this. However, I do think they're going to continue to rise. I think 15, 14 might even be possible.
Yeah,
I think they're going to add a few more people, a few more quality players. It's going to be historically bad for Florida, but there's some bright spots. They got a good pair of tackles. If they can add one more third quality lineman, that position is going to be relatively fixed. As far as the DBs there, like Edwards, Sean Davis is like a little yellow jacket. Not really even that little. He just flies around. They've got a couple of pieces in place on both sides of the ball. They just need more, and they need to take their state back.
Yep, that is rule one, topic one, however they want to put it on the board in their coach's room. Take the state back. Has to be one in bold letters, all caps, whatever it has to be.
Hey, one last thought on that, and just to kind of close out with this, you were like, hey, they need to get the LeBron Ray from Alabama. They need to get the Levi Jones from Texas.
Yeah.
They lost Elijah Blades from California. They're looking for Elijah Conliffe from Virginia. They got to bring it home. No more Maryland, no more Virginia. Take that I-4 corridor, get into IMG. It's time to be a boss, man.
You're right. I mean, and the thing is, would they even be looking at those guys if they could get the top in-state guys? Those guys may not even be on the radar because I mean, yeah, they flirted with Blades and Blades flirted with them for half a year now. But yeah, if Florida can get the DBs they want out of their own state, Blades is not even on on the board.
Yeah, even though he is legit.
Yes, yeah, that is right. That is right. So, Bill, thanks for joining me. I think we'll get this. We'll do this again for sure. I mean, this was too good not to do again.
I'd love to, man.
Yeah, there's some info. We may even make this a regular occurrence there. Bill will join me pretty soon after signing day. We'll like I said, we'll get together and we'll throw this current class that's coming up Sunday. So we have a 3 days away from signing day. We'll get all these new signees in. We'll let Bill crunch his numbers and figure out how these guys fit into historically Florida recruiting, and specifically, of course, under Jim McElwain. So, Gators breakdown evaluating Florida's recent recruiting history going into National Signing Day. So, for Bill, I'm David Waters. Thanks for listening to Gators Breakdown. We'll get this audio version out there for you later, and thanks for joining us.